If you do it the way you're doing it, which is presuming that you impeach the president, the House Democrats vote to impeach the president, it goes to the Senate. Chief Justice John Roberts presides, and he could theoretically compel John Bolton and others to testify. I've heard that as a legal theory as to why you're doing it that way. Is there any merit to that?
Well, I think there's certainly merit to the idea that we may get a quicker ruling from a Chief Justice in a Senate trial, if it ever came to that, than we would get by going months and months on and litigating the matter. There's no guarantee of that, but I think that it's entirely possible. Ultimately, though, one thing is clear. Because we have adduced so much evidence of guilt of this president, so much evidence of serious misconduct, any privilege the president would have would be vitiated by this crime fraud exception. So that will give way. And if it doesn't, to quote my colleague, Chairman Nadler, it will mean that either Justice Roberts or the Supreme Court itself is not really a conservative justice or court, merely a partisan one. And I have to hope that that's not the case for the country's sake.
So John Bolton's lawyer says that Bolton knows about, quote, many relevant meetings and conversations that have not yet been discussed in the testimonies thus far. Do you know what he's talking about? Has your committee been in touch with John Bolton and his lawyer?
We've certainly been in touch with his lawyer. And what we've been informed by his lawyer, because we invited him to come in and he did not choose to come in and testify, notwithstanding the fact that his deputy Fiona Hill and his other deputy, Colonel Vindman, and Tim Morris and others in the National Security Council have shown the courage to come in, is if we subpoena him, they will sue us in court. Mm-hmm. Now, he will have to explain one day, if he maintains that position, why he wanted to wait to put it in a book instead of tell the American people what he knew when it really mattered to the country.
Although it sounds like you're saying that there is the possibility that he could be compelled to testify in the Senate, theoretically.
Well, he could. Would
you be a House impeachment manager?
The thing is, Jake, that doesn't relieve him of the obligation right now to show the courage that Dr. Hill did. Mm-hmm. She was told not to come in. She was told that if she came in and testified, it could contravene this privilege or that privilege. She made the decision this is the right thing to do. John Bolton should make the same decision.
So, as you know, if the president, if there is a trial in the Senate, the president will be allowed to call his witnesses as well. The Republicans will be allowed to call their witnesses as well, that probably include Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, the whistleblower. And President Trump just yesterday said that you yourself should be compelled to testify if the House moves forward and it goes to the Senate. Would you be willing to do so in the House Judiciary Committee? Would you be willing to do so in the Senate?
There's nothing for me to testify about, Jake. And I think if the president or his allies in the Senate persist in this, it really means they're not serious about what they're doing. And
well, they would cite, sorry for interrupting, but they would cite David Kendall, who was President Clinton's attorney during that impeachment. He got to cross-examine Ken Starr. Now, I understand you're not an independent counsel, but you did lead the investigation.
This is not a insignificant distinction, Jake. I'm not a special counsel. I don't work for a separate branch of government. I'm not in the Justice Department. I am more in a position that Henry Hyde was during the Clinton impeachment, or Peter Rodino during the Nixon impeachment, or Sam Ervin. They were not fact witnesses. What would I offer in terms of testimony? That I heard Dr. Hill in an open hearing say such and such? That's not pertinent. The only reason for them to go through with this is to mollify the president, and that's not a good reason to try to call a member of Congress as a witness.
But you would acknowledge that there are questions you could answer about your staff having been approached by the whistleblower before he filed his complaint, and other matters, things that you could shed light on or explain. Would you refuse to go if the Senate wanted you to come as a witness?
I don't want to comment on it, except to say that if they go down this road, it shows a fundamental lack of seriousness, a willingness to try to turn this into a circus like the president would like, and I hope they don't go there. There are others who are fact witnesses. We didn't call in Senator Johnson. We're not calling in Devin Nunes. We didn't call in Senator Graham. There's a far stronger case for people like Senator Graham who talk to the president or fact witnesses than the chairman doing the investigative committee work in the House.
You just brought up Devin Nunes as your Republican counterpart on the committee. He is now denying an allegation made by the attorney for Rudy Giuliani's associate Lev Parnas, and Lev Parnas, according to his attorney, says that Nunes met with the former Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin in Vienna last year in part to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. Now, that's a lot of layers of people who I don't know how trustworthy they are, a lawyer and Lev Parnas and Viktor Shokin, but that allegation is being made by this individual. Did you know anything about these allegations? Do you find them credible?
I can't get into what I know at this point. I don't want to go into those specifics. I can say that we have subpoenaed documents from Mr. Parnas. We've had discussions with the Southern District of New York. In terms of Mr. Nunes' conduct, if he was on a taxpayer-funded Codell, and I say if, seeking dirt on a potential Democratic candidate for President Joe Biden, that will be an ethics matter. That's not before our committee. Our interest is in what this president ordered through his legal counsel, Rudy Giuliani, what efforts he made to condition official acts on the performance of political favors. That's where our focus is. But
is it credible that Parnas saying that you have information, you have knowledge? Is it a credible allegation? Is it worth, let me put it this way, is it worth the House Ethics Committee looking into, or is it just nonsense that should be ignored?
I don't want to comment on what the Ethics Committee should do, particularly vis-a-vis the ranking member of my committee. I will say we have subpoenaed, and did before these allegations were in the public domain, we have subpoenaed Mr. Parnas and Mr. Fruman for their records. We would like them to fully comply with those subpoenas. We may go beyond those documentary requests, but we first want to see the documents. And we have seen time and time again the importance of getting documents before witnesses testify. As we saw during the hearing when Ambassador Sondland brought in documents showing the Secretary of State was implicated in this. Mm-hmm. It would be nice to have those documents before we question people like the Secretary of State or question people like Mr. Parnas.
So your committee will come up with a report and then send it to the House Judiciary Committee. Your counterpart there is Congressman Jerry Nadler, Chairman Jerry Nadler, Democrat of New York. Take a listen to what he had to say just before he took over the chairmanship, laying out his standard for impeachment.
You don't want half the country to say to the other half for the next 30 years, we won the election, you stole it from us. You have to be able to think at the beginning of the impeachment process that the evidence is so clear of offenses so grave that once you've laid out all the evidence, a good fraction of the opposition voters will reluctantly admit to themselves they had to do it. Otherwise, you have a partisan impeachment which will tear the country apart.
I understand you think the evidence is there, but do you think you have reached that level of a good fraction of the opposition reluctantly admitting that you have to proceed with impeachment?
Well, there's certainly a number of leading Republican voices outside the Congress that are saying that this is impeachable conduct. And you can now add former Senator and former Secretary Chuck Hagel to the list of those that saying the Congress really needs to seriously consider impeachment. And that doesn't mean just Democrats, but Republicans. So there's a growing list of people, opinion leaders in that category. But as I mentioned before, at the end of the day, we have to decide what our constitutional duty is, even if our colleagues in the GOP and Congress have decided they're more committed to the person of the president than their constitutional duty. We're going to still have to do our duty. And
even if it costs you support, Democratic support in the House of Representatives, ultimately you could lose the House, even if it means it actually makes President Trump stronger. Take a look at this ad, this poll rather, because public support hasn't really changed. And nationally, there's a narrow majority in support of impeachment. But in the battleground states, it's different. A new poll out this week shows a majority of Wisconsin voters. That's a key state that Democrats need to win in 2020. 53% oppose impeaching the president and removing him from office. 40% support it. I don't know that the American people, especially in the battleground states, are where Chairman Nadler said they need to be.
Well, look, the public support for impeachment has grown fairly dramatically in the last 2 months. So whether it is now essentially at a plateau or whether it will continue to grow or shrink, I don't think is really the question we should be asking. I think in the first instance, we should be asking, what's our constitutional duty here? And if we decide our duty is to impeach, then we need to make the case to the American people, and we have to hope that we will be successful in making that case. But this shouldn't be driven by what we think helps us in 2020 or hurts us in 2020. There are good arguments by commentators in either direction. I don't think that's the question I should be asking myself. And as I mentioned in my closing statement the other day, Jake, What brought me from an opponent of going down the road to impeachment into someone who felt it was necessary that we do this inquiry is the fact that the day after Bob Mueller testified about Donald Trump's invitation to the Russians to intervene, his willingness to make use of it in his campaign, the lies that he told about it, and the obstruction of justice in terms of the investigation into it, the day after that, Jake, Donald Trump was back on the phone asking yet another foreign leader, Zelensky, for yet more foreign help in another election. And I don't think we can turn away from that if there is not some deterrent, even if it doesn't mean that the Republicans provide the kind of support for the Constitution that they should. If there isn't some deterrent, we can darn well be sure this president will commit even more egregious acts in the months ahead.
And once again, it sounds like you're ready to impeach President Trump, but I know you're going to talk to your constituents first.